Welcome back to Mr. B's math class. Today we're looking at 9.1, analyzing graphs of linear relations. Your outcome for today is actually two of them. The first one, I can describe patterns on the graph of linear equations. And two, I can create a table of values using points on a graph. This will be a little bit of a review from grade 7 hopefully, and we're just going to talk about that at first and then get into a little bit here on looking at how to actually plot points on the graph and then interpret when the points are already there. So let's begin. So first, like I promised, here is part of your review. So what you got to remember is on a graph, there's always a y-axis and an x-axis, and you can see here. Now what it says here is the y-axis is always on the side of the graph, right here, which is the vertical side. And the x-axis is always at the bottom, down here. No matter what, never changes. That's where y goes, and that's where x goes. This will follow you from math and through all your sciences. The other important thing to remember is when we're looking at actually the table of values, which is down here, the x value is always first on the table. Okay? So if it's sideways like this, the x will be on top. If it's upright, the x will be first there. But on the table of values, x always comes first, which seems a little bit backwards, but that's just the way this works. So these are two really important things you've got to remember when looking at graphs. Now let's take a look at our first example here. So first we're going to look at is making a table of values from a graph itself. So on here we've got our y-axis, which is our total cost, and we got our x values, which are our number of baseballs. And we're looking today at the cost of baseballs. As you can see here, all the points have been plotted. So all we have to do then is write down the values in this table. Now I know it's not ideal because I don't have any graphing paper for this lesson, so you got to kind of eyeball a little bit to see where each one is, but just bear with me as we go through this. So what I'd like you to do right now, before we do anything else, is pause it here and try to fill in first which one is x and which one is y, and then fill in the values. So if, x was 1 here, what is y here, and so on. For whatever point you see, write down what they are. And then you can hit play when you're ready to go. Okay, so let's start. So the first thing we know about this graph is that x values are always first on the table. So I've got to make sure I put my x there, and then it's followed by y. My first step is done. I've made part of my table. Now the simple thing is just plotting. So my first x point is right here, and that ends up being at 1. So I put my 1 there. My next point is 2, as you can see here. My next point is 3, and my next point is 4. So I'm just going to fill those in. The second step of just transferring this data is looking at if x was 1 here, what is it here? And on this graph, it's not 4 and it's not 2. So even though it's not perfectly centered, it's going to be 3. So at 1, here, y is 3. Now we'll look at 2 for our x value. I follow that up. 2 is x, which means that right here when I go across, y is 6. When I look at number 3, I go up and it's not exactly 10 yet, and it's not 8, so it's right in between, and it's 9. And for my last one, I follow up my 4 on my x value and go across, and it is 12. And that's as easy as filling in a graph for table values is. You just got to keep in mind where your x goes, where your y goes, and then it's just as simple as looking at your point that you've plotted and just figure out where the values are and put them on there, and you're done. And the same case, I'm going in reverse. But we'll look at the second part here is just analyzing the graph itself. Let's take a look at that. So here's an example of another graph, and now we're just looking at analyzing. We've already looked at how to plot points, how to find the data from the table. Now we're going to look at just analyzing the data. So here you can see I've got my title, which is a key portion of a graph. It's Matt's rate of pay. I've listed for you my y-axis, or the values here, which is pay on this side. I've got my title for my x-axis, which is time. And I've plotted all my points. So now we're just going to look at this and see what can we gather from this. Before we do anything though, I would like you once again to draw up yourself a value chart, and I'd like you to plot the points on the graph there. So you can pause it again and then hit play when you're ready to go. Okay, so when I look at it, my x always comes first, y comes second. I look at that first point, and it's at 1, which is at 10. 1 is at 10. When I look at 2, it's 2 to 20. When I look at 3, it's at 3 to 30. And 4, it's 4 to 40. And I forgot, I have one last thing to put in there. And 5 is 50. Filled in our thing. Now we're going to look and see, actually analyze this. So we know, if I want to know something here, first thing I want to know is what's my pattern, right? What pattern do I see in here? When I'm going from this point to here, well, let's look at the graph. At 1, it's 10. At 2, it's 20. At 3, it's 30. At 4, it's 40. At 5, it's 50. Well, I know that every time it's an x value moves up, it moves 10y, is what I know right away. So I know that in 1 hour, it's $10, right? For each hour here. I didn't really specify, so I probably should have made sure I showed you guys hours next time. But in 1 hour, it's $10. So then I know that after that in 2 hours, it's going to be $20. So my pattern is it just goes up by 10 each time. That it's per hour, I get $10 an hour, and every hour it goes up by 10 because you work that many more hours. And that's your pattern. So now we've figured out A, how to analyze, and B, how to get the data. Now there's one thing we're missing. And that's the key term of this lesson, which we're going to look at actually for the rest of this. And that term is linear relation. This is important, so make sure you write this down. You're going to look at this for the next 2 parts of this unit and into high school. A linear relation is a pattern that is made by a set of points that appear in a straight line. So you know if it's got a good pattern going, like our last one, going up by 10 each time, and the fact that it was a straight line, it's a linear relation. So on here, in this example here, A, you can see that 1 is at 2. Then 2 is at 4, so it's jumping up by 2s each time. So we've got our pattern, check. But the biggest telltale sign that you can tell right when looking at a graph is if this is in a straight line. If your points go right in a line, you're good to go. So this here is linear. When we go to the second one here, we look at our points, and it's 1 is at 1, 2 is at 2, then 4 jumps up to 6. There's no pattern, and what we can see here is that it's not a straight line. It curves around. It's got a curve to it, which means that right away, no, it is not a linear relation. So you can tell right away if something is a linear relation if first it's got a straight line and the second you've got that pattern going through there. So that's it for today's lesson. Check out the assignment below and we'll go from there.